Well, what will the West do with their puppet in Ukraine? What will the West do with Volodymyr Zelensky now that the war is over for Ukraine? Ukraine has turned into a graveyard, and reports over the past 24 hours over this weekend of Ukrainian soldiers in trenches, in bunkers, sitting next to the decomposing bodies of their comrades who've fallen days, weeks ago, because they have no one to come in and remove the bodies. That's how bad things have gotten for this graveyard in Ukraine. Our next guest says that Zelensky better get ready to be finished off by the CIA, the intelligence community. The CIA has a long track record, a very good track record of getting rid of leaders that have run out their value. And the CIA has managed to put an end to those people. Someone who knows exactly how the CIA operates is Larry Johnson, who used to work for the CIA. Has an intimate knowledge of how this unfolds. Larry, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Clayton. Good to be with you.
So your position over the past few days has been Zelensky better watch out. The CIA, the intelligence community, will do in him the way that they've done in other leaders, no?
Right. When you look at the history of the United States in dealing with these kinds of foreign conflicts, we have a very consistent pattern. You know, we're like the abusive spouse who's been married multiple times, who keep beating up our mate. So go back to Diem in Vietnam. He wound up dead. Then you get Manuel Noriega. He was kidnapped, taken prisoner. We invaded his country, brought him to the United States. Saddam Hussein, remember the photographs? He's arm in arm with Donald Rumsfeld. Hey, we're great friends.
Right.
So, the West has been praising Zelensky as the new Winston Churchill, which just, goes to underscore the level of delusion that has possessed the West. But now you're getting in all quarters, in Washington and London, Germany, and throughout the rest of NATO, these recriminations being expressed about Ukraine's failure to press the counteroffensive, failure to listen to the advice of the West, that they're always begging for more. So this is starting to become a more common thing. So I think the next natural step, whether the CIA does it or the CIA encourages somebody to do it, I don't think Zelensky's long for the world. He's not the kind of guy that I think is going to be allowed to go off into exile where he'll be sunning himself down in Miami Beach.
So he will become, in many ways, I guess they'll sort of treat him as a martyr, or they'll take him out because he's inconvenient now, and now we want to use some other sort of puppet in Ukraine. Do you think that they've reached this sort of tipping point in Washington where those folks sitting around the CIA have said he's run out his usefulness now? Now is the time that we step in and we mobilize Plan B.
I don't think we're there quite yet because, you've had Victoria Nuland elevated to the number 2 position in State Department as the Deputy Secretary of State. You've seen no sign from Blinken or Jake Sullivan that they're willing to start pulling the plug. But within the CIA, there are elements that have been coming out talking to people like Cy Hirsch, indicating that this thing is going astray and we're not going to succeed and something needs to be done. So the once unified position that was common in Washington is now starting to unravel. And when that unraveling process starts, it has a tendency to accelerate, coupled with the fact of the complete lack of progress by Ukraine on the ground militarily, and their increasingly desperate attacks with drones that they're hitting targets that have zero military significance.
Do you think that NATO is about to throw Ukraine under the bus? Or, we already know that they've thrown Ukraine under the bus, right? They don't give a shit about Ukraine. Right. Ukraine has become a graveyard for NATO's passions and expansion. But do you think that this sort of phony friendship is now going to dissolve and NATO will fully throw Ukraine under the bus?
Well, that's the interesting thing. Ukraine, even though it was not a de jure member of NATO, it has been a de facto member of NATO since 2014. And in that capacity, Ukraine represented the second largest military force in NATO. So the experiment, let's call it the experiment of the last 18 months, they knew that they were provoking Russia into retaliating militarily. Russia did. The West calculated that Russia would fail. Russia has not. And in the process, the second largest army in NATO is being eviscerated. NATO doesn't have an answer. What can NATO do? In fact, what they've watched is all of these incredible technological weapons systems that were going to be game changers are being destroyed and are not making any difference whatsoever on the ground. So and I think, candidly, NATO doesn't know what to do, because what is it going to do? What the United Kingdom's going to mobilize its army of 75,000 guys? I mean,
Right.
It's just we've reached the point. It's ridiculous. All NATO can do is talk tough, posture, and do nothing.
I want to get your sense of exactly how this attack on Zelensky would unfold, how the CIA will make this happen, the intelligence communities, the CIA, the MI6 will take out Zelensky. And I've heard reports that this would happen in a way where they would make it look like Russia did it. That's sort of the plan on the table right now, is that he will be taken out. They will make it look like Russia did it. He will be martyred in some sort of way as a convenient cover story. What's your sense of how this will unfold?
Well, the most likely one is an explosion in his headquarters that can then be attributed to a Russian missile that Russia did kill him. But I think that the key actors in this are going to be the military. Zelensky, the head of the Ukrainian military, because they're under enormous political pressure to deploy these troops, and Zelensky, for all of his faults, is still a military man, and I think it has to absolutely horrify him with the casualties that they're seeing. And you mentioned that report earlier, the Ukrainian troops sharing bunkers with corpses. I don't know if you've seen the image, but the image is just horrific.
Awful.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, can you imagine sitting there next to one of your fallen comrades from 2 weeks ago, whose body has been decomposing next to you while you're waiting to see whether or not you're going to survive?
Yeah, that type of death has a very tangible presence, as far as it affects all of your senses, and it's just and yet here these guys are. So I mean, it shows you the depths to which they've fallen. And Ukraine now, they don't have any viable path forward. They can throw as many men as they want at these defensive lines the Russians have erected, but they have no way of breaking through because they lack the essentials of air power, mobile artillery, etc.
I want to play now a clip for our audience and get your take on this, Larry. This is a remarkable clip from the man who's in charge of this entire theater for NATO and for the United States, and basically admitting that Russia hasn't been hindered at all in this operation. Undersea capabilities, air capabilities, they haven't been degraded at all. So all of what we've been hearing from the West has been an utter lie. Watch it right from the horse's mouth.
First of all, sir, if I could, I'd like to underline your comment about the specificity of the degradation of the Russian forces. Much of the Russian military has not been affected negatively by this conflict. One of those forces is their undersea forces. It's hard to talk in public, as you well know, sir, about undersea warfare and our efforts in that regard. But I can say that the Russians are more active than we've seen them in years, and their patrols into the Atlantic and throughout the Atlantic are at a high level. Most of the time, at a higher level than we've seen in years. And this is, as you pointed out, despite all of the efforts that they're undertaking.
So, Larry, he once again doubled down on this. This is, of course, testimony at the House Oversight Committee on specifically what's going on with Russian forces. And we've been hearing from the West. But you hear, I mean, NATO is absolutely losing this, and Russia has not been degraded at all.
Right. Well, and notice the narrative, the meme has shifted from Ukraine's defeating Russia to Ukraine is degrading Russia to, geez, Ukraine's not even degrading Russia. And what they're talking about in there is Russia's robust submarine force. Only two countries in the world with capable nuclear submarines are Russia and the United States. And Russia has actually probably risen to a level that surpasses the U.S. capability, because they've deployed a drone submarine capable of launching nuclear missiles on the United States, and the United States has no way to prevent that or to counter that threat. And within this, as we've seen over the last 18 months, Russia did underestimate or miscalculate the will of the West to try to throw everything in to support Ukraine, and had not ramped up its military production. But that has changed. It is now operating on all cylinders. It's producing everything from tanks to hypersonic missiles to conventional missiles to artillery shells to helmets and uniforms, everything that the Army needs. It has increased its manpower beyond its reserves. It's brought in new active duty. It's got the luxury of being able to train people. Everything that I've just said, Ukraine does not have. And NATO cannot supply. NATO can't make up the gap. So that's what the General Cavoli is, at least he has the common sense to acknowledge that reality, because everybody else has been pretending that the Russians are inept and incapable.
I want to talk, before I get you out of here, about Africa and, of course, the protests and, Africa on the rise, the kicking out of the Imperial West throughout Africa. And over the weekend, the United States started launching warplanes to the Niger border with weapons and armor. And I've read reports that much of the a lot of the weapons could be coming from Ukraine, that there could be a redistribution of weapons and armament coming from Ukraine, or at least some of the weapons that are meant for Ukraine are winding up in the black market being used there, which we've been reporting on here for a while. What's your sense of where the flow of this black market military equipment is coming from, and how and where it's going to wind up through Africa?
If I could go to a London bookie and they could allow you to place a bet, I think we're going to see some of these shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that were sent to Ukraine to attack Russians are going to wind up being used against U.S. and French military forces by the armies of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali.
Wow.
That they have probably gone to the black market because they've not been able to get these kinds of weapon systems from their colonial masters, as we shall call them. So we're looking at a real split. And the Wagner Group is reportedly in at least Mali and was offering to provide assistance to Niger. So what we're looking at is the possible start of a new proxy war between Russia and the West.
Great news. Great news.
Yeah.
Our proxy wars keep metastasizing like cancers all over the world.